Some swords don't stay stuck, some myths don't fade, and some heroes leave behind more than just a name. They leave direction. This is the Sword of Avalon, a Welsh tale not of dragons or duels, but of resonance, a story that begins in death and lives in firelight. Today, we're not just talking about Arthur's final battle, we're talking about the sword that came back up, and how one gesture, a hand rising from the lake, became the banner for a people who refused to be conquered. But first, I'm Empty Lynx, author, artist and indie dev, and if you enjoy the lore behind the language we use every day, or the philosophy behind the punctuation that shapes how we communicate, perhaps you enjoy deep dives into these ancient fairy tales and folklore and how they resonate today or have become the stories we hear about now. Or maybe you just enjoy having a quiet fairy tale read to you in a calm voice with a dark screen. I've got those up there too. Either way, if you enjoy my content, do me a favour, do the algorithm-y things. Hit subscribe and join me on this journey. And if you get something out of this video or the content I produce, do me a favour and give it a like. It lets the YouTube algorithm gods know that what I produce is worthwhile and has merit. And if you'd like to know when I drop new content, which is just about every day, give the bell a ring and it will tell you when the next video is getting ready to drop. And now, let's get back to the Storybite. When battles weren't enough. The Sword of Avalon. Many of the Welsh tales are about fighting and wars, and no country as small as Wales has so many castles. Yet these are nearly all in ruins and children play in them. This is because men got tired of battles and sieges. Everybody knows that King Arthur's knights had punched and speared, whacked and shot at each other with an axe and a sword long enough, and had slain dragons and tamed monsters and rescued princesses from cruel uncles, and good men from dark dungeons. Even the plain people, such as farmers and mechanics, had had enough and wanted no more. Besides this, they wished to be treated more like human beings and not have to work so hard, and also to keep their money when they earned it. Even King Arthur himself, towards the end of this era, saw that fashions were changing and he must change with them. Hardware was too high in price and was no longer needed for clothing. Wales has more castles per square mile than any other place in the world. But what the story tells us is this: the people got tired. Tired of war, of taxes, of working hard just to lose everything. And this isn't the beginning of a fantasy tale. It's the aftermath. The part where the swords get heavy and the flags get folded. Even Arthur sees it coming. The change is in the wind. Arthur's final insight. He was wise enough to see that battle axes, maces, swords, lances and armour had better be put to some better use scarce, when iron was getting scarce and wool and linen were cheaper. Even the stupid Normans learned that decency and kindness cost less and accomplished more in making the Welshry loyal subjects of the king. So when, after many battles, King Arthur went out to have a little war of his own and just enjoy the fight in which he was mortally wounded, he showed his greatness, even in the hour of his death. In truth, it is given to some men, like Samson, to be even mightier when their lives end, than when following by the strenuousness of life. So it was with this great and good man of Cymru. His love for his people never ceased for one moment, and in his dying hour he left a bequest that all his people have understood and acted upon. Thus it came to pass that the Welsh have been really unconquerable by Saxon or Norman, or even the 20th century day by the Teutons. Though living in a small country, they are amongst the greatest in the world, not in force or in material things, but in soul. When Belgium was invaded, they not only stood up in battle against the invader, but they welcomed to their homes tens of thousands of fugitives and fed and sheltered them. Brave as lions, their path of progress has been in faithfulness to duty, industry and patience, and along the paths of poetry, music and brotherhood, their motto for ages have been truth against the world. Now in the manner of King Arthur's taking off and his immortal legacy was on this fashion. After doing a great many and wonderful things in many countries, King Arthur came back to punish the wicked man Mordred. This is not the Arthur of the shining plates and fearless charges. This is Arthur in transition. The tale subtly paints him as aware, not defeated, but evolved. He sees the rising price of iron, the changing needs of his people, the uselessness of conquest when the people just want to live and love and be warm. And in this moment, Arthur becomes more than just a war hero. He becomes a visionary, because what he leaves behind isn't a kingdom, it's a gesture. The hand from the lake. In the battle that ensued, he received wounds that made him feel he was very soon to be no more. So he ordered his loyal vassal to take the sword to the island of Avalon. There he must cast the weapon into the deep water. This is the heart of the myth. Arthur's body is dying, and his sword, Excalibur, Cathedrals, is sent away, cast into the water, and instead of sinking, it returns. First the blade, then the hilt, then the hand. 3 times the sword is lifted and circled like a ritual gesture, like a myth refusing to end. This is more than a magical flourish. It's a prophecy in gesture that though Arthur's body fades, his spirit lives on, not as a ghost, not as a king, but as a symbol. The sword as soul. But the sword was part of the soul of Arthur. It would not sink out of sight until it had given a message from the king to the Welsh for all time. After it had been thrown into the water, it disappeared, but rose again. First the shining blade, then the hilt, then a hand was seen to rise out of the flood. Thrice that hand waved the sword round and round. This was the prophecy of the deathless from the dead. King Arthur's body might be hid in a cave or moulder in the ground, but his soul was to live and cheer his people. In myth, weapons often hold the soul of their bearer, but here it is literal. The sword is Arthur's legacy, incarnate. It refuses to vanish until it speaks, and what it says, through motion, not words, is this: this isn't over. My death is not the end. My people will rise again. That sword didn't need a sheath. It became a banner. The resurrection of a nation. His beloved Cymric nation, with their undying language, were to rise in power again. And the resurrection has been glorious, not by the might of the soldier or by arms of war, though the Welsh never flinch from duty or before the foe. Arthur's prophecy doesn't predict military resurrection. It promises cultural flame. This is myth as manifesto. The Welsh will not be conquered. Their language will survive. Their soul will stay intact. And centuries later, they prove it every day. In song, in story, in education, and in resistance. Not through war, but through the refusal to forget. Their national motto says it best: truth against the world. The sword as story. But by the power of poet, singer, and the narrator of stories that touch the imagination and fire the soul to noble deeds, have these results come home. Arthur's good blade, thus waved above the waters, became the veritable sword of the spirit. Men of genius arose to flush the colour of legends. Prophets, preachers, monks, missionaries carried all these over Europe and made them the vehicles of Christian doctrine. In their new forms they fired the imagination and illuminated, as with 10,000 lamps, many lands and nations until they held every people in their spell. In miracle and morality play, they reappeared in beauty. They attuned the harp, an instrument of the musician and the troubadour, and these sang the gospel in all the lands, north and south, while telling the stories of Adam and of Abraham and of Bethlehem and the cross, of the Holy Grail and of Arthur and his knights. All the precious lore of the Celtic race became transfigured to illustrate and enforce Christian mythos. The symbolic bowl, the Celtic cauldron of abundance, became the cup of the Eucharist, and the Grail the symbol of blessings eternal. The sword's second resurrection comes through art. Arthur may be gone, but his story fires the imagination. The sword becomes a metaphor, the Grail a symbol, the knightly code becomes applied ethics. Christian monks adopt the myths, artists shape them into stained glass, poets repurpose them for truth. The sword becomes a vehicle, from Celtic bowl to Eucharistic cup, from weapon to word. The rise of sacred architecture. By the artist in the stained glass and in the windows of the great churches, which were built no longer of wood but of stone, this blossomed under the chisel. The old legends were, by new currents of truth, given a mystic glow. As wonderful as the rise of Gothic architecture and the upbuilding of cathedrals, as glorious as the light and art that beautify the great temples of worship, was this the rebirth of the Arthurian legend. For now, against the old virtues of the knightly days, loyalty, obedience, redress of wrongs, reverence of womanhood, and the application of the ethics to the old rude rules of decency, lifted the life of the common people to a nobler plane and ushered in modern days. The sword that waved over the water now glows in Gothic windows. Arthur's legend migrates, not into warfare, but into architecture. The stories are no longer carved in runes, they're etched in marble, in music, in liturgical progression. And this is important. Arthur just doesn't symbolize power anymore. He becomes the symbol of redemptive transformation. He lives in cathedrals, not castles. The Cymric Renaissance. Then, after 700 years, a host of singers, Tennyson leading them all, attuned the old Celtic harp. They reset for us the Cymric melody and colourful incidents in the light that never was on sea or land. The old days live again in greater glory. Lady Guest put the Mabinogion into English, and Rhiannon and Arnold and Holliston and Rhys in prose competed in praise of the heritages from the old times. Popular education was diffused, and the Welsh language rose again from the dead. Cardiff holds in pure white marble the most thrilling interpretation of Welsh history in the 12 white marble statues of the great men of Wales. The Welsh people, by a bloodless victory, have won the respect of all mankind. Centuries pass, and the sword rises again, not from the water, but this time from text. Lady Guest brings the Mabinogion to English readers. Tennyson resets the melody for a whole new empire. And the result? The stories live again, not just as relics, but as living symbols. This is re-enchantment through education. The myth doesn't fade, it adapts. And through this, the Welsh language and legacy surge back into light. The sword that protected without striking. They set a beacon for the oppressed nations. And in the World War of 1914 to 1918, they helped to save freedom and civilization. They were in the man. Long may the sword of Arthur wave. The end. And when the world goes to war again, the Welsh show up, not just with soldiers, with poets, translators, humanity. Arthur's sword isn't just about conquest anymore, it's about values. The legacy of one hand from the lake becomes a guide for how to fight, and why. And even in global chaos, this myth holds. Why the sword still waves. This isn't a story about a man, it's a story about how a nation remembers itself. Arthur didn't rise again with horses and banners. He rose in language, in literature, and in imagination. His sword waved not to strike, but to say, this still matters. This still lives. We are not done. Now that's a powerful message. This has been Storybite, and I'm MT Lynx. And if you ever find yourself holding something too heavy to carry, remember Arthur and raise it higher. And now you know. I'll see you in the next video. This one, right here.